Donald Trump is terrified that oversight is coming after the midterms if and when Democrats take control of the House. And the very first thing that Donald Trump has now had Todd Blanche, the Attorney General, do since being sworn in is issue a memo stating that executive privilege, which would shield communications by the President of the United States, extends to so-called private advisor communication. So if Donald Trump spoke to someone who he deems to be a private advisor who does not work for the government, that would be shielded from any discovery or from any questioning by the House Oversight Committee. And then even Donald Trump's advisors in the Oval Office, their communications with private citizens, if they're seeking analysis or additional information that could be used by the presidency, they're going to assert a privilege to object from ever testifying about any of those communications. We have the memo that was just issued by the Department of Justice. Here's how they describe it on Punchbowl. Then I want to go through the memo, and I want to share with you that what this is also really about is it's covering up Donald Trump's dark past. This is going to be about shielding communications regarding the Epstein files. It's going to be about shielding communications to and from Jared Kushner, Kushner's communications with others. It's going to be trying to shield communications from, for example, the oil and gas industry, right? Donald Trump's going to say, all those people who came to the White House, we talked about Venezuela, they're my advisors. So you can't ask where the money's going that we've taken out from Venezuela because that's coming from my advisors, and they're basically deputized as being part of the White House. Donald Trump's kids, Don Jr. and Eric, what they're going to claim is, well, we're advisors or we spoke to White House advisors, so we're not going to speak about whether there was inside trading. We're not going to speak about those types of communications, and they're going to object and say it's all under executive privilege. Now you may be saying, can they just do this? No, I mean, it's unlawful. But this is then going to be litigated in the courts. What'll happen is Democrats on the House Oversight Committee will issue subpoenas. The privilege is going to be asserted by Trump. So let's just say the Democrats call into question oil executives, or the Democrats call into question those law firms that entered into those so-called settlements and bent the knee to Donald Trump, or Democrats in the House Oversight will call up, you name the corrupt group, the CEOs, the tech bros, you name them, right? The Zuckerbergs, the Bezoses, all of them. And what Donald Trump's going to say is, objection, executive privilege, they're my advisors. Any of those communications are protected. And then Democrats are going to say, okay, well, we're going to sue. And then Democrats are going to file lawsuits in DC federal court. And then there's going to be legal battles, and Trump will appeal. He'll file, ultimately to the Supreme Court. And you'll see, you've been seeing now with all of these cases, right? They take about 18 months for Donald Trump to lose. Eventually Trump will lose, as he does in most of these cases, but he's going to try to drag it out 18 months. I just want to give you the roadmap of what their plan is. Like the Kushner Albanian island, they're going to make that objection. Epstein file communications, the cover up, people who assisted Trump in the cover up, executive privilege. We already remember when we've been covering Pam Bondi's purported deposition before the House Oversight Committee, which wasn't a deposition at all. She called it an informal interview, right? Where she refused to go under oath. She refused to be under videotape. You remember Trump's Department of Justice would always object on the grounds of executive privilege when Bondi was asked really basic questions like, did you talk to Donald Trump about covering up the Epstein files? The DOJ was sitting there and they would say, objection, executive privilege. Did you speak with anybody in the White House, Ms. Bondi, about covering up the Epstein files, or that you had knowledge that Donald Trump engaged in criminal conduct or unlawful conduct? Did you have any knowledge about Donald Trump engaging in any, types of behavior that you are covering up? Objection, executive privilege. So we've already seen them use it, but at least there it was in the context of, well, she was the AG. So, and Trump at that time Trump's in office, so a communication between Trump and the AG. As it relates to covering up child sex trafficking, it shouldn't be covered. That shouldn't be subject to an executive privilege. I think that's what our founders envisioned. And by the way, executive privilege is not mentioned once in the Constitution. But if you were to say, well, the president should have deliberative, confidential communications about, certain sensitive matters, classified information, issues of war and peace, deliberative type stuff, but not to cover up child sex trafficking rings. You see how this has been so utterly perverted by the pervert who hides in catering trucks in Turkey to hide while he throws the press under the bus and has them go in an Air Force One that's apparently going to be subject to a strike by Iran. Anyway, here's how it's described on Punchbowl News. DOJ Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion that would allow the president to claim executive privilege over communications between him and private advisors. So not just in the situation of Bondi. A private advisor who Donald Trump could say are the business leaders, the tech bros, anybody outside of the White House that he declares as an advisor to me. Extends to direct advisors, communications with outside advisors also. So what the DOJ is saying in this memo that Todd Blanche prepared, it's not just Trump's communications with any of those interest groups that are probably involved in all of the corruption and criminality. It's also Trump's advisors. So Stephen Miller or Caroline Leavitt or Howard Lutnick or whoever's in the White House, their communications with these outside interests, as long as we say, they're advisors. A new Justice Department Office Legal Counsel memo released Monday says the president can assert executive privilege over communications with private advisors, so long as they relate to official presidential decision-making, involve or reflect communications with the president's or his direct advisors, and are confidential. Trump's going to claim that every one of his communications involved those things. The Office of Legal Counsel opinion extends that shield to the president's direct advisors' communications with private citizens too. That would let any president, including Donald Trump, wall off a broad swath of communication from congressional scrutiny. It lands as Democrats look increasingly likely to win back the House and subpoena power. So yes, the most transparent administration, this is how they're going to try to cover everything up right here. So I just want to give you the playbook. But let's just take a look at the memo for ourselves so you can see. This is from Todd Blanche's Department of Justice, and they're responding to the Counsel for the Presidency, the Office of the White House Counsel. And here's what they say. You have asked us, the Department of Justice is saying, you, the White House, have asked us whether the executive privilege, and particularly presidential communications component of it, permits the president to protect communications that he has with advisors who do not work for the executive branch. And then it goes and says, determining whether the privilege applies to any specific communication would require additional information about the facts and circumstances. But as a general matter, executive privilege can apply to presidential communications with private advisors, so long as the communication, 1, relates to official presidential decision-making, 2, involves or reflects communications with the president or his direct advisors, and 3, are confidential. Now, this is not a judicial opinion, to be clear. Any federal court that follows the law would say that's not what executive privilege applies to. It applies to communications, if anything, narrow in scope. It's a limited privilege. It can be overcome by a showing that the executive privilege gives way to a compelling interest, but it's just executive branch to executive branch communication. It's not outside of the White House. It's the most ridiculous concept ever. So a federal court will ultimately rule against this, but Trump's plan is, let me drag this out with all of those stays and pauses for 18 months by asserting executive privilege to everything. And so then in order to justify this unlawful memo, Todd Blanche starts to cite President Kennedy and Andrew Jackson and somehow says that their conduct justifies this, which, makes no sense at all. It says, President Kennedy explained over 60 years ago, the government needs men and women with a broad range of experience, knowledge, and ability in order to navigate successfully the problems of increasing complexity and technical difficulty. The president often must seek advice of these individuals to make the most sensitive and far-reaching decisions entrusted to any official under our constitutional system. Okay, but where does that have to deal with anything outside of the government? Here's how they try to justify it. History reflects a common sense understanding. In one well-known example, President Andrew Jackson frequently consulted an informal network of public and private advisors, often referred to as his kitchen cabinet. Like the White House staff, President Jackson's informal advisory group included policy advisors, speechwriters, liaisons, and publicists. Without any sort of formalized relationship within the government, these outside advisors served the president's needs and shared his perspective, overseeing the general direction of his administration. Even after modern presidents began to enjoy a more robust staff than their 19th century predecessors, they continued to solicit advice from advisors outside the government. Okay, but that doesn't mean they get executive privilege and all of those conversations are confidential. The White House is us. It belongs to us. It's we the people. The job of the president is to faithfully execute the laws. The people vote for Congress members and senators to enact laws for the president to sign and to faithfully execute, to carry them out. That's the job. So where in the Constitution, where in your historical analysis has any president ever said their communications with people who don't work in the White House, people who don't work for the executive branch, are subject to privilege where the public doesn't get to know about them? That's what it's. No one's saying that Donald Trump can't consult or any president can't consult with outside people. You can consult with outside people. You say Andrew Jackson did the kitchen cabinet. You said FDR reached out to these. Okay, you can reach out. The issue is transparency. So, and by the way, I mean, Trump often engages in crimes with these people, as we know, but the issue is one of transparency. We should know what the communications are about. That's it. That's all we're saying. There should be oversight conducted into it. This would be like former president, just think about it, any former president basically saying, you know what? Any of the communications that my family members have or anybody have outside, I'm going to claim that everybody in my orbit is subject to executive privilege, which is just absolutely ludicrous. You go to page 9. In addition to presidential communications, executive privilege applies to certain other categories of confidential executive branch information. Recall again that the president alone and unaided cannot execute the laws. He must execute them by the assistance of subordinates. Executive privilege thus protects the mental processes of agency officials, as well as communications between high government officials and those who advise and assist them in the performance of their manifold duties. The privilege furthermore protects executive branch communications and documents that involve legal analysis, legal advice, and other attorney communications or work product. So they're just saying, even if you're not the president, if you're a president's advisor and you're speaking with somebody outside of the White House to get information for the president, they're going to assert executive privilege over that. And I just note some of the stories in the past few days as well, and you think about this type of stuff that we need more information about. I mean, New Mexico state, the state of New Mexico is suing the Justice Department for stonewalling the Epstein investigation. The lawsuit was filed by the New Mexico Attorney General, saying that the Trump regime was supposed to turn over all of these, the Epstein files under the Epstein Transparency Act, that the DOJ has tapped him along and is refusing to provide any documents about the Zorro Ranch. The DOJ continues to cover up. Todd Blanche continues to cover up the child sex trafficking. And the AG of New Mexico is like, what the hell are you doing? Just turn over the documents so we can investigate what the hell happened in New Mexico. We need these DOJ documents. And the DOJ is absolutely covering it up. Hat tip to MeidasTouch network host Katie Fang, as Katie Fang is the first person to lead the way and show under the Epstein Transparency Act how to get, how to fight back against the Trump regime. But one of the tactics that they're probably going to say is, well, everything's executive privilege, or, and if you think about the privilege log that the Trump regime is hiding, just think about the millions of documents that they've withheld under executive privilege. Now that we know they've taken this interpretation with executive privilege, right? Their view of executive privilege, it contains all this. Think about it. All of these people who are perpetrators and co-conspirators, they're just going to claim that they're they're already claiming they're victims, right? The co-conspirators, they're going to claim that they're like advisors and say, well, we're advisors, so therefore all of our information gets covered up as well. You think about the scoop from the Wall Street Journal about the Kushners taking over the Albanian island, Sazan, the Sazan Islands. And this Wall Street Journal writer, Juan Ferrero, shared how the Wall Street Journal revealed that Jared Kushner's $120 million coastal land, but they're actually putting billions of dollars into it, that they made this transaction with a Miami-based Albanian-American businessman, Arthur Sheehu, who faces Albanian SPAC probes for alleged cocaine trafficking, money laundering via real estate, and forging land deeds. Prosecutors froze the sale of proceeds in a notary account as well, and that's from the article there. Got a lot going on in the House right now, so we'll leave the analysis. Leave the analysis there. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers. Thanks for watching.
Before you go, our book, WTF America, is available for pre-order now. It's the story of how we got here and how we fight our way back. To pre-order, scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Let's do this.